Opening credits. Ava and Carol Detective Agency, The Haunted Mansion. Written by Thomas Lockhaven, with Emily Chase. Edited by Dave Aretha. Narrated by Amy Johnson. Chapter 1. Livingston festivities are horrifying. Do you want to hear a real ghost story? Ethan Palmer leaned forward, leering at the children who sat huddled in a half moon around a roaring campfire. The fire cracked and hissed, rebelling against the cold December night. It was 4 days before Christmas, and as was Livingston tradition, the kids had spent the afternoon engaged in snowball fights, sledding, and ice skating on Lake Crystal. But now, Ethan Eugene Palmer had decided that the evening of festivities should take on a more sinister tone. Ethan's face was thin and pale. His green eyes sparkled mischievously in the firelight. He was a few years older than the rest of the kids, and he seemed to take great pleasure in scaring the life out of them. His unusually red lips curled into an evil grin as he began to spin the tale. "Everyone here knows the old butcher house, right?" he asked, jabbing a stick into the fire, sending a fiery cloud of embers skyward. "Well, I found out why it's been empty all these years. You want to know why?" He paused, looking at each of the children as if daring them to speak. Finally, a very small voice whispered, "Because it's haunted?" "No, Riley," smiled Ethan. He shook his head at the group. "At least someone has the courage to speak up. It's something much more evil than your ordinary ghost. Much more evil." "They're politicians?" offered Ava. "Nice one," whispered Carol. Ethan glared at the two girls. The usually animated group of children fell silent as a graveyard. He rubbed his hands together as if he were about to enjoy an exquisite feast. Then Ethan lowered his voice and began to speak slowly, mysteriously. "Most of you have never heard of Jack and Ruby Butcher. But as children, they used to play in their grandparents' house. They had the run of the house except for their grandmother's room. That room was strictly off limits. Their grandma had died 2 years earlier, and they say George Butcher, the grandfather, never got over her death." He paused, letting the story settle in. "One rainy afternoon, while their grandfather was sleeping, Jack and Ruby got bored and decided to play hide-and-seek. You've all played hide-and-seek, right?" Ethan smiled as the children nodded silently. "Just like you and me, Jack probably placed his hands over his eyes and softly counted 1, 2, 3, while his sister ran to hide. No one knows why, but Ruby decided to sneak up the stairs to her grandmother's bedroom. She didn't want to wake her grandfather, so she took off her shoes and slowly crept up the stairs. She had just reached the top step when she heard her brother creeping around looking for her. Her heart was pounding. She knew that she wasn't supposed to go in her grandma's room, but when she reached for the doorknob, the door swung open all by itself. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to get caught by her grandfather or her brother, so she rushed into her grandmother's room. Ruby crept over to the closet and paused. Should she open it? Jack would never look for her there. She pushed her finger down on the latch, and with a metallic click, the door creaked open. Ethan reached out his hand, pretending to be Ruby reaching for the door. When she opened the closet door, the smell of mothballs and stale air hit her like a ton of bricks. She was scared, Ethan whispered. But Jack had just reached the top of the stairs. The closet was tiny and filled with her grandmother's shoes and clothes. Ruby decided that she would just fit. She reached in and began to slowly push her grandmother's clothes apart. Suddenly, a bony hand circled her wrist, squeezing, crushing. Ruby tried to scream, but her throat closed. Ethan's eyes narrowed evilly. The skeleton hand began pulling Ruby into the closet. "Come, my sweetie," a cackling, squeaky voice laughed. Ruby's eyes dropped to her wrist. Her grandmother's charm bracelet dangled from the bones. Ruby gripped the door frame with her other hand, but she wasn't strong enough, Ethan said, whispering. Ruby could feel her fingers slipping. Her socked feet slid into the closet. The skeletal arm yanked hard, and Ruby's fingers slipped from the door, clawing at the air. She closed her eyes and fell. Ethan paused. The children were silent, pressed up against one another, barely breathing, hanging onto his every word. Ruby looked up from the floor. Her brother stood over her, a broken lamp in his hand. A bony finger and their grandmother's charm bracelet lay on the floor at Jack's feet. Suddenly, the children's grandfather and father rushed into the room. They looked from Jack to Ruby. A purplish black bruise in the shape of a human hand began forming on Ruby's wrist. Jack tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "And then," said Ethan slowly, the grandfather turned to the father and smiled. "You said you liked the little boy the least." The father nodded, and without speaking, shoved Jack backwards into the closet. Before Ruby could do anything, a skeletal hand wrapped around Jack's waist and pulled him into the closet. The very next day, the family disappeared and were never seen again. But they say Jack's ghost still haunts the butcher house. That's why it's still empty. Ah, perfect timing. He smiled at the frightened children as he climbed to his feet. "Your parents are here. Make sure you ask them to drive by the old butcher house on the way home." He grinned excitedly, waving to the parents as they approached. Shaken, the children scrambled to their feet and scurried off to the safety of their parents' arms. "Sleep well," Ethan called out, obviously pleased with himself. The holidays had officially started. "That was terrifyingly creepy," whispered Ava as she stood, wiping the snow from the seat of her pants. "I thought we were gonna sing and roast marshmallows," said Carol, "not give the kids nightmares." "Your singing gives me nightmares, so I kind of prefer the ghost story," winked Ava. "You know," smiled Carol, "if we take Whitmore Street, we can walk past the butcher house on the way home." Ava made a face. "Really?" "Ava Clark," smirked Carol. "What happened to your sense of adventure?" It takes a pass when it comes to evil spirits, zombies, me dying in a closet." Come on, said Carol, grabbing Ava's hoodie by the sleeve. It's just an empty old house. What's the worst that could happen?
If you're enjoying Thomas Lockhaven's audiobook content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.